I now look to Edwina Currie to continue the case for the proposition.
Mr. President, it's a great honour as ever to be in this august House. I can recall many, many years ago when I sat in, you're in my seat, and you're in my seat. But in those days, it was unheard of for both the proposer and the opposer to be women. And when I spoke here, I was often the only woman speaking. So it's wonderful to see that and to see the changes. When Margaret Roberts was here, 20 years before that, she wasn't even allowed to be a member, and she used to have to watch the debates from up there. The world has changed enormously in that lifetime as well. Let me dispose, first of all, of some of the arguments that we've heard put with such eloquence on the other side. When it comes to how she destroyed mining jobs, for example, let me put some flesh on that. According to The Guardian, and if you want to see it, I've tweeted it all. According to The Guardian, far more jobs were lost in the mining industry before Margaret Thatcher took over. In 1980, there were 230,000 mining jobs, and it's certainly true that 10 years later there were only 57,000. But during the 60s and the 70s, over 300,000 mining jobs were lost. And indeed, it was my own constituents, and I'll come back to them in a minute, who used to say to me, well, it was George Brown that closed most of the pits round here. And George, you'll have to look him up. He used to be deputy leader of the Labour Party. Somebody else in the Labour Party whose name has completely vanished and nobody knows who they are anymore. And if it comes to the destruction of industries, which the Honourable Lady there spoke of with such eloquence, yes, it's certainly true that the contribution to the GDP of this country of manufacturing and mining dropped substantially during her time, as it did in Germany, as it did in America, as it did in a number of countries. I can put figures on that if you want as well. It's all in the Guardian article. I wouldn't dream of quoting from anybody else but the Guardian. And you can't say that Margaret Thatcher was the Prime Minister of Germany. She would have been if she'd had half a chance. You can't say that she was the President of the United States. So what was happening was the deindustrialization and the arrival of much more sophisticated businesses and service activities and so on that were contributing a much higher productivity to the nation at large. And that might have happened anyway. I mean, there's one sense in which, I suppose, the only deceit that we're trying to operate is giving Margaret Thatcher the credit for something that might have happened anyway, whoever was in charge. But in fact, it was her policies that made it happen in this country, and she was the first properly to confront those issues and make something happen. She's been painted as if she was an extremely wealthy lady. Well, she wasn't. Her dad was a shopkeeper, right? They counted their pennies. My dad was in very similar circumstances. Like her, I went to a grammar school. Oh, you can hear my Liverpool accent coming back. Well, why not? It's working class. If you'd ever asked my mother which class she was in, she'd have said, I'm working class. Of course I'm working class. And don't tell me I've got an accent, Edwina, because I haven't. Oh, yes, she had. Oh, yes, she had. I don't have to argue. We don't have to argue on this side of the house that she was perfect. She was very far from perfect. Indeed, I remember hearing her say on TV, let me see if I can get the voice. I don't care what my ministers say, as long as they do as I tell them. A couple of years ago, I had to do a panto in Northwich. And I came home, my husband said, what's the panto? I said, it's Snow White. And he said, are you playing Snow White? And me playing Snow White? You've got to be joking. I'm going to be the Wicked Queen. And I did the entire thing with Margaret Thatcher's voice. It went down brilliantly. She was our longest-serving peacetime Prime Minister ever. And she couldn't have done that without the votes of working people. It was impossible to do it without the votes of working-class people. We don't have to argue, as I think we've heard on the other side, that she ought not to be a working-class hero. We simply have to argue that she was a working-class hero, and she could not have been elected without the support of the working class in this country. There were many areas. She understood about the trade unions and how they no longer supported the working class, and we've heard that from Lord Howard. She understood working class aspirations and the wish to have a better life for themselves and for their children, and we've heard that particularly eloquently from the proposer. But most of all, I think she understood their patriotism. She understood their love of their country. She reacted instinctively in exactly the same way that working people did. And more important in some ways, it can be very difficult, and this is not being patronised, it's a simple matter of fact. It can be very difficult sometimes when you are not in sympathy with a viewpoint to understand where it's coming from and to understand the good that's behind it. I want to just mention two particular things, if I may. The first is that I represented a coal mining constituency. I went to a mining constituency, I lived in it and I worked in it and I looked after 80,000 of the voters in it. And my miners in South Derbyshire decided that they were going to take a vote, which Mr. Scargill never did. Even though that's what it said in the rule book, he never took a vote. But my miners read the rule book and they said, we're going to have a vote, and we're going to do it on a postal vote, and we're going to have it in secret. And they had over 90% turnout, and 86% voted to work, and then work they did. And I'll tell you why the pickets were turned back before they could come and intimidate our miners, because people like me spoke to the police. I don't have time, I do apologise. Because people like me spoke to the police, because my constituents are coming to me and saying, that picket line is 5 deep, and somebody's going to get killed. And they're not from round here. And they're not from Yorkshire, they're from bloody Keele University. That's where most of them came from. Coal mining dust and their fingernails? Of course. But it was dangerous, it was intimidating, and that's what picketing was for. That was its entire purpose, was to put people off doing what they actually wanted to do, which was to go to work. Never mind going on strike, to go to work. And the miners said to me, Edwina, we're digging dirt down there, and it's dangerous. Your job is to get us something else to do. And moreover, they said to me, we hear all this about rolling back tides of Thatcherism. This is what Scargill was going on. Do we roll back tides of Thatcherism? We voted for tides of Thatcherism, Edwina. That's why you're here. And they deeply disapproved of any suggestion that a strike could do what strikes had done to Labour and Tory governments for decades, which is bring down the government and cow them into submission. So I don't want to hear any more about, oh, of course, every time you turned up to somebody's house, the cupboard was bare. Of course they was, Peter. They knew you were coming. One more point, because this is where perhaps in some ways I found myself a little out of agreement with her. Perhaps I'd myself become a little bit too middle class. And that was her patriotism, and the patriotism that it reflected in the ordinary working people of this country, particularly the Falklands. I wasn't in the house at the time. He got extra, I'm having extra. I won't abuse it, I promise. But the Falklands in 1982, I couldn't figure out why on earth we should spend thousands and thousands of pounds, millions of pounds, and put thousands of lives at risk in order to go and rescue the Falklands. But I was busy door knocking at the time in 1982 for the election in Birmingham, where I was a city councillor, and people were saying on the doorstep, that Margaret Thatcher, she's absolutely right. I'm going to vote, which one did you say? You're Conservative, I'm going to vote for you. And we won. We won. I didn't agree with it, But I could see that she was in tune with that. And she was in tune with a very deeply held form of patriotism. A patriotism that's proud of being British. A patriotism that's proud that this country has successfully repelled invaders for 1,000 years. A patriotism that is about wanting to govern ourselves. A patriotism that's found its way into all sorts of votes recently, which we won't mention tonight. I may not agree with it, but she became a hero to the working people of the country on that basis. And for that reason, Mr. President, ladies, gentlemen, everybody, even Peter, I beg you to support the motion.